Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this is the podcast for you. Hey legends, and welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. Today's episode, we're switching it up from the red deer and transitioning to awesome fallow bucks that we've been chasing around New South Wales for the last week or so. In this podcast, it's just Aiden's gone back up north to do some guiding on chittle deer, but luckily we've subbed him in for the very loved Nick Doumtsis, our father. So welcome to the podcast, back again.
Thank you for having me. Look forward to having a chat.
And on this week's podcast, we're going to be sharing some stories of some success that we've had in the last week. So Dad's going to be sharing some successful stories on a fallow buck as well as a few other critters. And I'm just going to be breaking down the importance of buck to doe ratio once again, and also a quick take on my approach on what to do when you first get access to a new property. We'll also touch base on a couple of FAQ questions that have been sent in to info@twinelements.com.au. So if you've got any questions, please send them through. Equally, please send us a DM on social media, and that is at Twin Elements Instagram account or James Doumtsis Outdoors or Aiden Doumtsis Outdoors, and we'll answer those questions as promptly as we can. So thank you to everyone that listens, and we'll jump into the podcast. Numa Outdoors is our camouflage clothing of choice. The team has formulated a durable, breathable, quiet, and comfortable camouflage lineup, suitable for all terrains, season, and pursuits, with a great pattern to keep you concealed. You may have recently seen us running the Renegade lineup in our recent adventures up north. We're pleased to announce that Numa products are available in Australia, so head to Venture Hunting Outdoors website to check them out for yourself. So before Dad jumps into his successful buck story, I just wanted to give a bit of a background to the property that we're hunting on. So this place is about 15,000 acres, quite a large property in the Hunter Valley. And essentially it's riddled with fallow deer, to be honest. I was lucky enough to gain access to this property just before the rut last year. So Dad and I actually hunted it last year, and just for a couple of days. And yeah, it's got a lot of fallow deer, but which a lot of hunters, I guess, would see probably as a blessing. But when you're a bow hunter and there's, I guess, 50 does in a mob, or at least 30 in most mobs, and there's one buck that you're trying to shoot, it sort of makes things quite difficult. And the biggest thing I wanted to talk to you guys about was not only how that affects, the buck to doe ratio affects the quality of the rut that you're going to have, but also talk about how that affects, genetics being passed on, and how inherently you end up getting sort of worse, more cull buck style with big clefts and everything like that over time, because everyone wants to shoot the big magnificent buck, essentially, with beautiful palms and everything like that, and no one really wants to shoot the smaller clefty bucks and whatnot. So what's happened, and it's interesting talking to the actual property owners and sort of having that realization with them, where 25 years ago they didn't even, like, when this person had the place, he said it was rare to see fallow deer, for example. And what's happened in the last 20 years or so is the population has just boomed. And so even though they had a chopper shoot in the area a couple of years ago that wiped out, most of the population, there was still this residual core amount that, the population's come back. And so in the 15,000 acre property, I'd probably estimate that there's maybe 500 to 700 fallow deer. And I'd say that's a fairly conservative estimate. Do you think that's pretty close?
Yeah, I agree. I've, like you just touched on, I've seen some huge mobs of does just on a hill face, and and you'll see 3 or 4 mobs as you walk through the hills. So, and that's conservative, I think.
Yeah, it's nothing to see 100 fallow deer in a day, or in a hunt, really, on a certain ridge, for example, or and the adjacent ridge. And so what has happened though is that the buck to doe ratio, for reasons I'm about to describe, have got quite bad, in the sense that it's probably 1 to 10, if not more, 1 to 15, in terms of 15 does to 1 buck. And what that means is that in the 2 days that we're on this property, we probably saw maybe 10 bucks, and they were all really, really poor genetics, like clefty as, just really ugly. Like there was nothing really that had, complete palms or good palms, I guess. And I think why that is firstly the population's boom, but secondly, on this place it does get quite a lot of hunting pressure, which is fine. But what's happened is everyone comes during the rut and shoots. Just from talking to the property owner and stuff, and the manager and their mates and stuff. They probably shoot 30 to 40 bucks on this place every year. And they do put a lot of pressure on the deer. Like if they see deer when they're just driving around, they do it. But during the rut, it's pretty much, you've got a couple of people hunting it most days, just through friends of the property owners and whatnot. It essentially, if you think about it, so 30 to 40 bucks for the last, just say 10 years have been shot in this place. So that's 300 bucks. And I mean, they do shoot the odd doe when they're just driving around, but they also shoot the odd buck, so and spiker and whatnot. So what's happened is there's become this huge imbalance in the population, where there's just a ridiculous amount of does, and what it does is then the bucks don't need to compete to breed, and so there's no sort of genetic selection, I guess, or potential where the bigger bucks and the more mature bucks, and generally the better bucks, because if you guys remember from our Fallow deer podcast, like the doe chooses the buck. But when you're left with essentially shit, there's not really a choice. And so all these bucks, like we saw so many bucks, and even like little 2 and 3 year old bucks, like Aiden and I covered a lot of country, saw a lot of bucks. And I think the oldest one was maybe 4 years old. Like there was nothing really, like everything had huge, like really high coronets. Like, it was, yeah. And even like the oldest buck that we saw, that we probably thought was maybe 4 or 5, it actually snapped off his antler. So it sort of got a pass from us. But it was just sort of disappointing to see, to the point that I, at the end of the trip there, actually sort of spoke to the property owner and said, this place is at the point now where it either needs like a lot of spotlighting work done by like, a professional roo shooter or something like that to just like clear out all the does, or it's at the point where it's like it probably actually would benefit getting chopper shot again. And that's like an interesting concept coming in from a hunter where like, most people, I guess love when it's like, oh yeah, you want like hundreds of animals on this place. But I mean, from a conservation point of view, it's not great having that, and that's probably needs a lot of rouge shot in this place too, to be honest. But so yeah, from like a conservation point of view and just like a land management point of view, like having an extra 500 head of animals, just say if there is 500 to 700 head, like I think that it would actually be better for the heads that you got off the place as a hunter if there was only 200 fallow deer on the place. But I also think the likelihood, whether it be a bow or a rifle, you would be more successful in getting bigger heads if there was only 200 on the place, because it would allow sort of only the better genetics to come through and shine through. And it'd be easier for you to actually shoot cull bucks when every buck is a cull buck. It sort of makes it hard, and you don't want to then affect that doe to buck ratio any more than it already is. And so for Aiden and I, when we were hunting, like we essentially walked around and, we just looked at a lot of crappy bucks and passed up a lot of crappy bucks. Like we had a lot of cool encounters with bucks, at less than 10 to 15 meters, that we never pulled the trigger on. But, luckily for Dad, and I guess because of sort of the situation this property's in, we just sort of said, hey, if you get the opportunity to shoot something or want to have a stalk on something, like, in terms of management, this place is sort of pretty far gone, as I've sort of alluded to. So, Dad went out one morning, and I'll let him finish the rest of the story.
Yeah, I basically, this was day 2 of my solo hunt. Just if I jump forward, I agree with you. You put me in a really hot spot where I had 5 or 6 croaking bucks, and I glassed them all, and they probably looked like 3 or 4 year old bucks, but all of them would have one split antler, So there was one I dubbed ugly, and I said he has to be taken out. But unfortunately, he was on a hot doe, and it was just so tricky because he was just following everywhere. And every time I nearly got the jump, she'd race off down the hill. And then, funny enough, she'd come back to the exact scrape that I was following for most of the morning. But I got to see a really good hot spot on the property. But to be honest, if anything, the property had gone backwards in the 1 year that we were there, So that was very unfortunate because, and there was less bucks, but the bucks that I saw were of poorer quality and split palms. And it was not encouraging. But now today, 2 of my solo hunt, I went to a totally different area. And to be honest, I didn't anticipate seeing a lot of deer here. It's probably more pig country, I guess. It's a lot of rolling hills, blackberries, not a lot of clean benches, not a lot of pasture. But I thought, look, just going to give it a run. So I just cruised up and down the ridge line, just listening, and I heard 2 bucks croaking. One was, they were probably a kilometre away from each other, but they were faint enough for them to pick up and compete with. And I think it was now 10 o'clock, and the one that I was going to try to hone in on stopped croaking. But I thought, look, I'm going to do a bigger loop back home, and I've got nothing to lose. And funny enough, I was coming from below, and I was approaching this bench. And as I got there, I don't know why, I just had this sense of feeling, just stopped. I stopped in a bit of a shady spot, had a look around. Unfortunately, 2 roos caught my attention. And they bounced away. And as I did that, I sort of turned to my right, and I can see about 120 metres away, there was a buck on a scrape bedded down. Now, the reason why I saw him was there was not a lot of cover. It was all sort of tussocky sort of grass, no real, understory. It was a very tall timber, and except for this one massive tree that had fallen, and it must have fallen storm where the root ball type thing come up, and it had all these sort of ugly spiky root things coming up, and that's where the buck was directly behind it. And the wind was coming from behind him and blowing into my face, but he was looking in my direction. I don't think he actually saw me, but I think, he was definitely looking out for danger downwind, and he sort of stood there looking for a while because obviously the roos drew his attention to where I was coming from. I stood there for a little while and just looked at him. I slowly lifted up the binoculars. I can see he was fixed in my direction. And I just waited, and slowly, it must have been flies or mosquitoes bugging him, because every time he went to scratch his back with his antlers, he'd lift his head and do a flick. And I'd slowly take a step to my right where I was trying to get behind one of these massive gums I referred to earlier. And eventually I dropped down and I planned my stalk. And to be honest, I was quite nervous because it was open cover, but I used the only bit of root ball that he was sort of parked behind as a reference. And I just remember crawling. And it was funny because I thought, I'm going to blow this stalk. No way am I going to get lucky. I'm going to blow this stalk. But it was funny at that moment, I was listening to Aidan's podcast about his chittle deer, where he just referred to this chittle deer in a mob of a whole lot of hinds, and he said he's just going to wait and be patient, and took little steps, and he kept on glassing it. And that, I drew on that as inspiration. I thought, well, you know what? I've got the rest of the day. So, and the wind was good. But the other thing that was funny was that I had the other buck that was croaking that would draw his attention. The current buck that I was stalking on would turn away and not look in my direction and sort of fixate on where he was coming from. But also, it was quite blowy. The wind was very good. It was in my favour, and I had massive bark come off these huge gums and crack down and create, like a deterrent for him to look around and see where the danger was. So I think when I got to about 25 metres, I thought, 25 metres of the fallen tree, I thought, I can do this. And I was doing like a, left hand, I had my bow put the bow in front of me, do a bit of an army crawl, and I continued that all the way until I got to about 25 metres of the tree. And I remember ranging behind the buck. There was another fallen tree which was about 30-something metres from where I was, about 32. And then there was another one to my left that was before him, and that was about 28, I think. So I ranged him basically in between that distance, and I couldn't shoot. I had no angle to shoot, because if I went either left or right, he would, I was so close that he would make me out. So I remained out of his line of sight behind that dead tree root ball, and I just waited for him to get up. And I don't know what happened. He sort of went for a stretch after about 45 minutes just sitting there. He stretched up, and he looked, he was now completely broadside, but he sort of slightly turned to look behind him. And then as quickly as he did that, he looked to his right, which was the buck that was calling further down. And funny enough, at this point, I had my left leg down, flat to the ground, and I sort of was in a position I've never drew my bow back, let alone, taken a shot. And funny enough, it's a brand new bow. I have knocked it because I was trying to call in foxes, but I've never actually drawn it back to shoot an animal. So funny enough, that was the first time I was shooting at an animal, a target animal. And look, I was just blown away because everything come together. I shot the buck through the chest in that triangle, and he virtually ran 15 feet, 20 feet. And I did it. And, you see often in YouTube, they do the little mink, 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 mink. And funny enough, he turned around, but as he turned around, he sort of lost his balance and fell. And both his antlers got caught in one of those trees, And there he sort of, expired. I gave him a bit of time. I think it was about 10 minutes. And, yeah, it was just... And the funny thing is... after James saw the photos, he said, "You idiot, that's the only one that had good genetics," because he had both his palms. I said, "No, but they look a bit, wonky." He goes, "No, that's because half his antlers are split, because obviously from fighting or something like." Yeah, and I just thought, did I do a bad thing? Because obviously James is trying to manage his property. So, but I'll let James sort of explain a little bit about that.
Cayuga broadheads are engineered for success and built by experience. These are the broadheads we trust for all of our bow hunts. Whether it's buffalo and bangtang bulls in Australia's Northern Territory or chital deer along the basalt wall, we have ultimate confidence in their range. I'm currently loving the 150 grain Zots. Regardless of your preferred broadhead, quality and performance is guaranteed across the range. If you would like to try them today or shoot them already and want to restock, head to their website and use code TWIN10, that's TWIN 10 numerically at checkout for 10% off your next order. You will not be disappointed.
No, he was completely fine. We as it goes on this podcast, we're just trying to educate, not dictate on what people do with their hunting. And yeah, like we'd given Dad the all clear on this place. Just because how it is managed by everyone, it's sort of hard when you don't have sole access and you've got people just shooting everything and anything, and the balance is so far out. Like I just said to Dad, if anything takes your fancy, go and shoot it. But yeah, he was a nice buck. He did have good genetics. He was missing sort of the back half of his palm, but yeah, it was an awesome little story, and for Dad to just go out there and get it done solo. Aiden and I were very proud when he got back to camp, having carried all the meat out and had the set of antlers, and yeah, he was chuffed, and we were certainly chuffed for him. So it was a good little hunt. Aiden and I were not so successful. I was running camera again on this hunt, and the first day, it was only 2 days on this particular block. The first day we'd sort of hunted along ridge and had some pretty cool encounters. We pretty much identified most of the bucks that were croaking on the ridge. There was actually a lot of activity this year, which was really good, but most of all the bucks that we ID'd were pretty poor quality and pretty young as well. We didn't really see anything mature. Like we said, the oldest one was probably that one with sort of a snapped off main beam just above his tray tine, and he might have been 4 or 5. But yeah, the antler that he did have was a double cleft as well, and so we almost considered shooting him because we caught him into about 7 meters on his scrape, which in itself was really cool. But yeah, that second day we went and hunted a gully system it's a west facing slope or hill, and it was a little bit more of a struggle. Like, I love actually hunting as an arrow hunt because you get the thermals right till last light essentially, so you can come in above them and then sort of just hunt down. It's normally a really good hunt anytime during the year. You get a lot of goats there and a few pigs and whatnot, so it's a good sort of everything type of walk. And on this morning we'd sort of come up from the bottom, just trying to have the thermals working in our favour, and we ended up having a buck croaking above us and moved in, and he wasn't too bad. He wasn't a giant, but he was probably the best that we saw out of the 10 or so bucks in the 2 days. And just decided similarly again, like just with the low management that was on this place, that because that took Aiden's fancy, that he was going to go and try and get him. And we sort of moved in, and as we were moving in, just as we've described, there was so many deer around, and so we ended up having some deer around the corner get our wind as sort of the thermals started to switch, like quite early in the morning. Like, it was just an updraft that got them, and then they bounded off, and that caused the buck and probably about 8 of his does at the time to run off up the hill and sort of go into some thicker stuff. And we thought that was sort of going to be it, but we ended up moving up and looking at a few other bucks, and having some pretty cool encounters with some does and whatnot. And he ended up croaking again sort of below us, and we sort of cut back down and sort of moved. He hadn't actually moved that far from where we'd pushed him the first time or scared him the first time. He'd probably moved only 200 or 300 meters around the hill, but he'd gone into some quite thick bush, and we started cutting back down to him, and could hear like the doe chirping in there. But the reason why he was croaking was because there was I think it was 2 smaller bucks and a spiker sort of hot on his tail, and because he was in thick bush, it was sort of, they were getting a bit cocky, I guess, and sort of all the smaller bucks were putting a fair bit of pressure on him and trying to cut this hot doe out. So he was having a bit of a hard time as she was sort of darting through all the thicker bush. And he sort of just kept croaking, and Aiden and I slowly taking a step in, just because it was so thick. And we could see all the other bucks, but couldn't really see him properly, and could see the doe and whatnot. And anyway, it just it went silent, I guess, when we were probably 70 meters away, and not sure if that was a thermal sort of dropping down the hill, or if something had caught our movement, as it's so hard in that thick stuff, and especially with me filming Aiden and 2 people moving in and stuff, as we've spoken about before. And they went quiet, and then he gave a couple more croaks, and then that was sort of it. And whether, it could have equally been, like, as I guess a fairly analytical person, I probably draw more on the fact that we'd probably stuffed up in some way, misjudging the thermals or being seen. But equally, it could have just been the pressure from all those other little bucks and spikers and stuff trying to steal the hot doe, and he just got sick of it, and the doe broke. But that was the last we heard of him, and that was the last of our rut hunt. So Aiden left to go back up to Queensland the next day. And Dad and I carried on with our hunting for a couple more days. With unmatched quality, performance and reputation, Aimright International is our go-to for spear guns, wetsuits and fins. Whether it be coral trout, wahoo or dogtooth tuna, Aimright has you covered on or in the water. Check them out today at their website. So with Aiden having left to go back up to Queensland to do some guiding, and Dad not really, and I not seeing anything that sort of took our fancy with the fallow deer after seeing quite a few bucks. They were obviously going really well on this property, but just not seeing that sort of next level of maturity. Dad and I made the decision, having him not shot a red stag before, to change it up and go to a couple of properties that Aiden and I had visited earlier in the piece, to try our luck on getting onto a red stag for Dad. And what we ended up doing was, to be honest, we didn't really see any red stags. We saw one very, very far off in the distance with a couple of hinds on a neighbour's place, sadly, and that was pretty much it. Given it's sort of later it was fairly late in the piece, like we're talking about the end of April now. We sort of opted for a more spot and stalked style tactic, given how low the amount of roaring was during what I would say the peak rut, so 20th of sort of March until the 10th of April. I think, we might have only heard 10 to 20 roars. I'm like, well, what's the chance that they're going to be roaring sort of after the 20th of April? Not to say that, a hot hind couldn't come in and they couldn't, but we just thought we'd switch it up and use spot and stalk. So we found the biggest mountain we could and set up on some glass and pretty much spent the mornings glassing. And one day was very unsuccessful. We barely saw anything. The only thing we saw was a wild dog, which was the first for me in that area, and also to the property owners after talking to them. So that was interesting. I think that's why it was sort of so quiet. But the second day we'd seen some animals, or seen some reds off in the distance, as the typical trend goes on the neighbour's place. So we sort of, we made the most of the opportunities in the sense that we looked down on the bench below us and there was a rutting mob of pigs, and I'll let Dad finish his story. And
just to elaborate, when you say below us, it sounds like it's only 50 metres away. Can you please explain? Now, mind you, we're on the biggest hill on the property, glassing as much distance and, area we can possibly do. And mind you, it was a killer to get in there for an old bloke. And then James decided, he goes, you know what? I don't know what those reds are doing. I think they'll probably bed up in the neighbour's property. I don't think they're coming back this way. Let's go and get the pigs. And I'm looking down thinking, that's a long way down. It was a pretty steep sort of valley. And if you can imagine, the top was sort of lightly timbered, but as you get to the intermediate level, it was all dogwood and other stuff that was quite thick to navigate through. And then you've got to come through that and then find out where the pigs are. But he was quite confident. I've never hunted like that because I've done a lot of early mountain hunting when I was a lot younger, but it was a different style. Whereas James was keen to get down there. But sure enough, we got there. And we got onto a very small rutting mob. Like, how many boars would you say were in there, James?
There was probably
three?
two main boars, and then two smaller, like 40 kilo sort of boars, and then two sows. It was a pretty poor rutting mob, to be honest, but.
Hey, actually, I did see one earlier, just as the sun was rising. I saw one on the on this sort of game trail that I saw later on. He sort of disappeared to the left, and I pointed out to James, look, he's a good size, but by the time we got eyes on him, he sort of disappeared. I guess that's what older, smarter boars do. But we're left with a sort of 65 kilo black and white boar who seems to be running the show. And there was interesting enough, another smaller boar. I don't know how, what his live weight would be, but he got to about 5 metres of me when I was trying to stalk in, and I was confident in my camo. He walked right up, didn't even know I was there. He did a bit of a, as they do, they sort of, not a scrape, but they leaned forward a little bit and they started urinating around and doing his little rutting pose, and then just went back to try to get in on the action. But I was lucky enough where James, there's not a lot of pigs on this property, and I guess it's, you never want to manage pigs because, I guess they're pests. But James says, look, we're set up, we've got the camera rolling, take him out. And at this point, I sort of got into range. I was comfortable. I think it was about a 28 metre shot, but I just felt that he was going to dip down into the creek line. And he sort of turned and gave me a quarter in away shot, which I took, and managed to seal the deal, so to speak. And I was stoked. I haven't shot a pig for a while, which was good.
Yeah, it was. We had a little black boar that Dad was saying how it peed right in front of us at 4 or 5 meters, and what he was sort of hanging on the outside of the mob, and that black and white boar was just over the top of that sow essentially. And every time the black boar would come, close, the black and white boar would sort of, go defend him off and move outside the mob to kick him out. The black and white boar didn't really care about the smaller boars and the sow and stuff. He just sort of wanted to keep that other, probably similarly sized boar, maybe 50, 60 kilos out. It was pretty much textbook. Like the black boar did that big pee in front of us, and because they've got the spiral penis, you can see he's just like spinning it around, bloody all over himself on the ground, everything like that. And the sun was like right behind it, so you could see the show and the spray. It probably got Dad's shoe, to be honest. And then he sort of moved back in on the mob, and you could just read like, oh, this black and white boar is going to come. And he came walking out, and I was like, oh, it's going to be perfect. Dad's going to shoot him, quartering on at 15, but he ended up pulling up a bit short and turning around, and obviously presented Dad the shot, and Dad pickled him, and he probably ran 60, 70 metres down the hill in a sort of a mad dash. Actually, interesting enough, these are Dad's first couple of kills. With the Cayuga pilot cuts, he's recently just switched over, so it'd be interesting to see how he's have you been enjoying them?
Absolutely love them. Yeah, I can't believe how I don't know if it's a brand new bow or the setup, but the arrows whip through. Amazing, and leaves a beautiful blood trail and just does the damage. I mean, I know everyone advocates for whatever they're using, and I probably don't have loyalty to anything apart from my passion for hunting, so whatever works. But I was amazed. The boys just said, look, try these. And I did a couple of test runs here at James's place with the broadheads, and I liked the flight of the arrow, and I was grouping well. But, normally I'll sort of find the arrow broken off in there but they were just whipping right through, and I just thought, wow, that was probably my one thing from this trip that I took away where I was really impressed. So, Ian Summers, whatever you're doing, mate, keep it up. Great job.
And then, so after the boar, the one interesting thing, and it might have been the black boar, the bigger boar that Dad saw leaving at first light, but the black and white boar on its sort of top of its scapula, the top of its back, had, I'd say, maybe a 5 or 6 inch gash, and probably a 1.5 inches wide and probably an inch deep. Like, it was a pretty impressive sort of gouge out of the top of this thing's back, where you can clearly see that a tusk has gone in probably an inch and just like hooked him and just like absolutely opened this thing up. So clearly there's, a bigger boar, if not a couple of bigger boars, that were rutting on that mob as well at some stage.
Yeah, it's funny. That's where we had a discrepancy when I went up to the boar, had a look at him, and you noticed that and you said, wow, that's recent. And I was arguing with, I go, no, that looks like it's healed. But what it was, obviously with the wallowing, it sort of given it a darker texture. And then when we sort of opened up, it was a sort of fresh wound, wasn't it? And I was amazed at how deep it was. Like, seriously, it was crazy.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, we talk about, we get little cuts and burns and blisters and stuff, and then you look at something like that where there's like, the gouge in this thing was impressive, and he was still rutting over a sow, and just bloody tough animals they are. And he'd obviously been ripped up and copped a hiding and just gone and wallowed, and like, yep, we're just going to dump a heap of mud in it, and that's going to be the Band-Aid and fix it up. And yeah, because like Dad was saying, like, there was just a thin layer of mud over the top of it, and but then once you sort of opened it a little bit, you could see all the fresh blood coming straight through it. So I mean, I'm imagining it was on that rutting sow maybe the day before, or even earlier during the night and stuff, and he's just gone out a wallow in the creek and then come back. But yeah, it was very impressive, and awesome to get the drop on a handy boar. And then Dad pretty quickly backed it up on a nice billy, which was awesome to see. There was a big mob that was sort of moving towards where these red stag and these hinds were on the neighbour's place, just thinking, they were sort of more out in the open country and thinking, okay, if they're going to bed on our place, it was a fair walk. It was probably like what Dad was saying, we were on top of a massive ridge, glassing probably 3 to 4 Ks away at the furthest. And sadly, we'd sort of picked him up at that range with the Leopold spotter, and bloody, it was a bit sad, as always, seeing him on the neighbour's place, because it's so low density where we're hunting. So yeah, we glassed all of our place, which is 5,000 acres, and didn't see a single deer. and just found this small mob over the boundary fence. And anyway, they were about a K in, and we thought, well, if they're going to come anywhere on our place, it's going to be this little bit of cover right on the fence where I've seen them bedded before. So with what had been happening with the pig, and after taking a couple of photos and videos and stuff, we're like, well, it's probably time that if they did feed in that direction, because we'd sort of dropped off the mountain, we don't know which direction they went. We're just like, oh, we may as well start moving in that way and just have a bit of a hunt. And so we started moving towards the cover, and it came across this mob of billies.
Yeah. Oh, look, it was amazing how many billies or goats in general. This was not a super mob, but how many animals would you anticipate? 20, 30? Yeah. And they were all just feeding up on their hind legs, trying to get the fresh pickings up on top. They were just like, an organised group just marching through and just picking, and they kept on moving. Occasionally, they might just sit down, have a rest, then keep moving again. But they were all communicating, and when you hear a pig snort, you sort of worry because you think, oh, something's going up. But I heard a lot of billy or goats snorting, but I don't know, I've never heard that before. But they didn't know that we were there. We just casually sort of, followed them. Well, once James said there was a shooter in the mob, I decided to sort of stalk in, and we got in on a couple of different angle shots in order to try to take him out. But at the same time, there was a lot of movement around me, so I just had to be quiet. Let him pass because we couldn't take this particular shot. And then we ended up catching up with him around this, made sure the wind was in our favour. And we found him feeding in this longer grass with a fair bit of cover. And I think I snuck into about 15 metres, and I put a pretty good shot in. Once again, I was just amazed with the pilot cut, just whipped through him, and he expired after 20 metres, do you think? Max 20. He barely went anywhere, to be honest. Like, it was sort of surprising how quickly, like, we heard him go down and we're like, oh, there's no way that could be it. And anyway, as typical fashion, it was pretty thick bush, so we didn't want to bump him around like that. And we gave him, 2 minutes, like, oh, we'll just go. And we pretty much went to where you shot him, grabbed the arrow and looked up, and then there he was. Yeah, the blood trail was pretty easy because it was on yellow sort of straw, that'd been dried out. So, like, when I looked at him, I thought, how big do you reckon? Once again, I haven't hunted for Billy for a long time, and he said, oh, what'd you say, 28? Yeah, it was probably a little bit bigger than that, probably 32 inches or something like that, which for me, it was, he's not the biggest Billy in the world. There's plenty of, 40s, obviously the magic number when it comes to goats, but they muster these places, or they have mustered this place a fair bit. And so, to be honest, normally when I see billies, they're like, the typical like 16-inch billies. So, there's a lot of guys out there that are like, oh, 32, that's not that very big. But it's, when your place doesn't have many billies and stuff, and the property owner had said, we're not mustering them anymore or whatever. So if you see any goats that tickle your fancy, like, have at them sort of thing. And as soon as I saw him, he was well and truly sort of the biggest in that mob. And just said to Dad, hey, if you want to. And he obviously jumped at the opportunity and got it done very quickly. Like, it was one of these things that we just sort of cut around, and Dad got into the perfect position, was able to capitalise, and he went nowhere. So he was pretty good billy to get on the deck, and just backing it after that boar. It was a great little morning hunt. Sadly, we weren't able to locate any red deer that we were targeting, but a couple of little prizes in between, and ended a really good day out in the bush.
Embark on an unforgettable journey with our fully guided Chiddle deer hunts, catering to both rifle and bow hunters. Spotted Safaris is conducted in the heart of the Basalt Wall region, North Queensland, Australia. We specialise in catering to all experience and fitness levels of our clients, providing trophy stag Chiddle hunts as well as beginner focus adventures and meat hunts. With over 15 years bow hunting Chiddle deer, our guides know these animals and the grounds they hunt like the back of their hands. With chances at a mature basalt boar as a bycatch and some spectacular wildlife viewing, there really is something for everyone at Spotted Safaris. Inquire today by emailing spottedsafaris@hotmail.com or simply send them a DM on their socials.
And the last hunt of the trip that we did was we went to another property to check out, another one that we'd actually gone during the rut, similarly trying to find red deer, but worse off for us, even worse densities. We've spoken about it a couple of times. We're on this place. I think we're up to about 10 days out there. It's only a relatively new place that we're camping on, and I think we've only seen 4 red deer until this trip. So sort of banging your head against the brick wall a little bit. And Dad and I went out for the morning hunt, and it's had a fire there in the last sort of 10 years or so, and there's a lot of sapling regrowth, which makes things quite difficult, and just the way that you have to access certain parts of the property without doing massive sort of 7K loops. You've got to sort of drop down into some gullies with the wind on your back, and I don't know if that's one of the main reasons that we can't find the reds, but there's also not an incredible amount of sign there. But we were lucky enough sort of mid-morning one day to find 2 red hinds and a fawn bedded up on the hill, which for most people listening to this podcast, obviously it doesn't sound much, but I was absolutely stoked to see these hinds because, after seeing 4 deer total on the place, seeing 2 more hinds and a yearling just gave me a bit of hope that, in years to come, it could mean that there's a bit more of a population there, and also just mean a few more critters and animals to hunt. The property owner on this place is pretty happy for the deer and the pigs and stuff to be there, especially, at the moment, they're sort of rare as hen's teeth. So I guess we'll cross that bridge when there's a few more of them, hopefully. But at the moment, when you're seeing, they see them pretty much never, maybe once a year. So, and for us to be going out there flat out and doing kilometres after kilometres and glassing after glassing and seeing them probably every second or third time at this rate, there's obviously not a lot of them. But we had the morning hunt, and it was pretty blowy conditions. We sort of had everything quite low down in the gullies, and it's quite thick country with all the burnt regrowth, so it was pretty hard locating animals. So the morning was pretty slow, to be honest. Like, we didn't really see much. But what I did want to tackle was in the afternoon, we actually went on to the neighbour's place, which is a place that I'd got access to through some veterinary works and preg testing. And I just wanted to do a quick breakdown with you guys over how I, approach and tackle getting access to a new property. So the first trick that I use is actually talking to the property owners, which sounds a bit obvious, I guess, but just asking them exactly where they see stuff. So we just sort of said, hey, what can we, what do you normally typically see and where and stuff? And they say, to be honest, we see a few goats. We rarely see pigs. We see the odd fallow deer, which sort of, I guess, sets you up most of the time. It's pretty rare that someone goes, we don't really see much. And then you rock up and there's like 50 fallow deer living out the back. Because these guys obviously work in the land, mustering and everything like that. So, when they're mustering and checking waters, they're going to get a fairly good idea of sort of what critters are running around. And to be honest, they were pretty open in the sense that they said, we want everything sort of shot that you see. Like they're like, they're a pest animal. Like, they ruin the fences, they dig up the dirt. They're competing for feed. So they just said, anything that you see, if you guys can shoot, they'd really appreciate it, and we were more than welcome to oblige. So that was the first sort of step, I guess, that I take when accessing a new property. The next thing that I do is I actually spend a fair bit of time on maps, and that's just trying to work out sort of, I guess, taking into consideration like animal habits and characteristics and behavior and stuff like that. So for me, it's sort of which way the predominant wind direction is and like where you can get access. So for us, it was a quite a long, it's about a 3,500 acre property that we got access to, and it's quite a long open block surrounded by really thick native bush that sort of runs in an east to west direction with the wind coming from the east. So not huge hills and quite open pastures. And so what we ended up doing was parking on the furthest west end, and what we'd planned to do was to sort of walk the boundary where there was some little stands of trees ranging from, and like thick scrubby stuff in little creek bottoms and sort of just like little knolls and whatnot that had a bit of cover on them that might have deer bedding up in them. And we planned to start on the western end and walk the boundary fence, essentially anticipating that animals would probably be coming out of the neighbour's place onto the pasture to feed as the day went on. But really, we were just looking for sign. And that's one of the biggest things. Like it's the first time going to a place, really I just like to cover country. Like if you get onto something or see even something, it's great. But to be honest, you're working out whether it's even worth coming back to this place, which I know sounds silly, but for someone that, you know, a lot of people I'd say look at Aiden and I and even Dad and you know, would say relatively successful bow hunters. I can't think of, and Dad can probably lay testament to this, like how many times you've been to places where they're like, oh yeah, we've got heaps of deer or heaps of pigs and stuff like that in the last, you know, 25 years of us going hunting. And, you know, you spend 2 hours driving it, especially when we were younger. You'd spend 2 hours driving somewhere trying to find a pig block, and then you actually talk to them. And, you know, it's that the fact that they had pigs on there, you know, they saw a pig, like one pig 3 years ago, and that's like, oh yeah, we've got heaps of pigs on here, sort of thing. So the first one is like, is it even worth going back to? Because for every great property I have, I've probably gone to 3 duds where you've walked around and seen, you know, a tiny little bit of pig digging, and you're like, yeah, okay, there's like a sow and suckers that, you know, might come here every so often, or a boar passes through, but it's definitely not like holding pigs, and it's probably not worth coming back to. And things can change quite quickly, especially in the areas that I live with low densities and stuff like that, where, you know, animals might go somewhere to rut, or, you know, animals might move to a new area if there's crops being put in and stuff. So it's worth probably visiting properties a couple of times before you completely rule them out. But I definitely, definitely like just seeing as much country as I can. And so we pretty much spent we got there at 3:00, dark's at 6. And so because the wind comes from the east, and the way that it all works, one of the other questions I like to ask the property owner is where sort of the stock are. So this place has cattle and sheep, and they'd sort of said the most eastern corner, which also was like a little sort of kick out. So it had, like, most of the place there was a fence that ran pretty much straight west to east, but in this one furthest east corner, it had like a little extra square of a paddock that had, you know, like it might have been 500 acres or so. And I'd already identified on the place, the most likely area that we'd probably see stuff was in that corner, because it was, instead of it being like a one long fence line of cover, I guess, it was almost a paddock surrounded by 3/4 sides of native bush rather than just one long fence line. And so yeah, we pretty much spent the first 3 and a bit Ks of this fence line just walking, and to be honest, not seeing very much. Like, I think we saw one potential fallow rub, maybe a bit of goat shit, and some pretty old pig diggings. And that sort of took us to about 5:30, and we just started to get into this pocket where, there was no stock and everything like that, and there was a bit higher feed, and that was when Dad actually spotted a little fawn fallow deer sort of running around in the bottom of a gully with its mum. And that was pretty cool. We got some footage. And to be honest, it wasn't until, so after that moment, we took another probably 100 meters, and I'm like, here we go. We're going to be on here, because I saw 2 spikers. And we actually went and moved past them. And I actually realised and remembered then, because obviously thinking like, oh, we're getting into the better country and we've only got half an hour of light here. And obviously normally looking for like a more mature animal. We went to move past them, and it wasn't until I actually remembered, I'm like, oh no, the property owner actually wants us to shoot everything, that I said to Dad, no, we're going back to go and have a crack at these spikers, because we're probably about 500 metres from the doe. And so we went back and had a little stalk on the spikers, and once again, I'll let Dad fill you in on the story.
Well, I was really surprised when we kept on walking and you said, hey, let's go back. We need some venison as well for one of the property owners who requested some. And he asked me if I was keen. I said, yeah, absolutely. So, like you've just mentioned, you spotted the 2 spikers sort of feeding down into I guess, towards a pasture. So they're quite high, following the slope of the ridge line and coming down in some pretty thick cover. But as you mentioned earlier, it was very windy. The wind was in our favour. And I think I got to 28 metres. And
we've worked out that Dad's favourite shooting distance in the world now is 28 metres, because the pig was 28 metres. The goat wasn't 28 metres, but this fallow deer was 28 metres too. So everything, as soon as you, and hunters, you'll probably be able to, Dad's got a single pin sight. So you work out, like mine's 25 most of the time. Like it's probably a lot less now, but because I have a single pin slider that's set to 25 metres, as soon as you get to 25, you're like, cool. And that's where most people just pull up and shoot. And so I don't know, what's yours?
Mine's 30.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So as soon as Dad gets to 28, he's like, yep, game over. Let's go.
Well, I got into a comfortable shooting lane. And look, James is very passionate about getting everything on film. And maybe you can jump in and explain what happened.
Yeah, we moved in. These two spikers are just feeding in some sort of patchy scrub, I guess, and on the edge of a bench. And like Dad said, the wind was howling, so it was quite easy stalking. Like we pretty much walked up to them. Like it wasn't really challenging at all. And we got set up, and I'm bloody absolutely Peter Jacksoning the shit out of this, and just had like the perfect shot angle right over Dad's shoulder, and had like a 200mm lens, so just like the perfect crop. Like I'm like, this is just, the lighting was great. Like this is top quality stuff. And I'm not gonna lie, like this rut, we've filmed some pretty cool hunts, Aiden and I, and even Dad now, and got some awesome footage that we can't wait to share with you guys. And like I think the level of the camera work, that because we've upgraded a lot of our gear recently, like the quality of the footage and content that we've got has just sort of gone to that next level, to the point that like it even surprises me sometimes, and I just like get off on getting good shots on film, and good content on film, and just really enjoying the filming at the moment. And I'm like, here we go, it's happening again. This is going to be absolutely perfect. And anyway, the first of the two spikers, like it's standing at Dad's favorite 28 meters, and he goes to draw back, and it just takes 2 steps and goes behind this bush. And I'm like, okay, perfect. And then so the second one is feeding up right behind it, and according to Dad, it was 3 or 4 meters further than the original spiker came through. In my mind, it was pretty much in the exact same spot. So I've got this camera angle set up perfectly where Dad's on like the left side, and this other spiker's on the right side, and he's sort of waiting and stuff, and he's a little bit quartering on. I'm like, okay, yep, they don't know we're here, fair enough, like wait. And so I'm watching the second spiker that's come through, and it does, like, it ends up taking a step and just stretching its leg out, and then all of a sudden, like, I'm watching Dad, and he like draws back. I'm like, okay, this thing's like perfect. And I'm looking at the angles and like the lighting and everything, and I'm like, oh mate, you couldn't script this better. This is absolutely perfect. And then all of a sudden Dad shoots, and anyway, obviously Dad had his heart set on the first one, because all you could see of the first one was its head on the far left corner, like over Dad's left shoulder. And so Dad's absolutely pickled the first one, but sadly for me, it's like you can't see it. And so it ran off, and as soon, because I was watching through the viewfinder and I was so closely zoomed in, like it's pretty much Dad on the left and this spiker on the right, like filling the screen. And so as soon as he shot, I'm like, yeah, he didn't shoot that one. So I've swung around and just got the spiker running off or whatever, and he just runs over, and you see him getting the wobbles up, and like I don't get him falling over, but he just ran over the crest and died. And I'm not going to lie, I was a little bit disappointed. And I take full responsibility, because I probably should have asked him, or been like, which one are you going to shoot? But for me, it was like, I just, after the first one went through, I was, and then the second one was, in my mind, the second one was coming into the same spot. I'm like, yeah, that's the one he's going to shoot. But that wasn't the case.
Well, I have to apologise, because I was fixated on that first one. I was in the zone, I was following him, and I'm like, yep, making mental notes, yep. Once he does that, steps out, stretches that leg out, and I think I should have readjusted, really, because the other one was in a better position, but I think it was a couple of meters over, so I thought, no, I don't want to shoot over 30. But look, he was down, it was a good shot, and, all is well that ends well. Unfortunately, we didn't get it on film, which I know frustrates you, so I apologise for that.
No, it's all right. It's part of the game. So we've had a very good running tally and trend, I guess, with films so far for the year that Aiden and I have done together, and even our dad with his couple of kills. We've had really good footage and being able to document, all of it and like film. Like we've probably got pretty lucky in the sense of, haven't had anything sort of get shot off film or anything like that. Which has been extraordinary considering how many days in the field we've had, really.
But I guess you make your luck too, because I mean, I'm not the fittest blokes, but we put a lot of Ks in, and I know you and Aiden would do heaps more. So I guess you work hard for what you get.
Yeah, definitely. We've done a lot. I should work out how many Ks I've done in the last 30 odd days. This is actually the last rut. It's sort of interesting because my partner said, when does the rut end? And I sort of smart-assingly said October when they drop their antlers. But yeah, this is officially the last sort of rut hunt. I guess now it's, Dad's flying out tomorrow, so we'll be just left with me trying to, get more properties and do more research, I guess, and try and scout more for next year where it all starts again. But now it probably clicks over to US training, I guess, a little bit for Aiden and I. We were lucky enough to draw tags in Montana for general deer and elk. So both of us have got tags, antelope tags. We'll be coming out shortly as well. So we're going to see if we draw them. But yeah, we will be training like madmen for the next sort of 3-4 months to start getting fit for that, and want to go over there and might even try and get a black bear over the counter tag as well, if we've got enough time, and sort of get one of them as well. So yeah, we're super keen for that, but we've got a few more little hunts planned in the future. But I know you've got a few pretty big ticket item hunts planned for the rest of this year. You've got New Zealand coming up shortly for TAR in July, I believe, and then also doing another Bantang trip with Paddo at Dingo Creek in October for a Bantang and a couple of boars, hopefully. So know where you stand with onX, the most accurate GPS mapping tech for outdoor enthusiasts, trusted by millions of hunters worldwide. We utilize onX whilst hunting in the US. Its mapping systems, specialist drop pins, tracking features, topographical maps, and accuracy is unmatched. Being able to plan and prepare for our hunts overseas in the comfort of our own home is a game changer. If you're looking at hunting in the US, Canada, or Alaska, then onX is a must. How's your training been going for New Zealand?
Yeah, I've just joined the gym, first time in my life.
We can tell.
We shouldn't laugh, but I think it's helped me. I don't know. You said you feel like I'm a little bit fitter.
Oh, for sure. I think compared to, the last time we saw Dad in a hunting sense was for Bantang last year in October. And for me personally, that was a sort of a 3-week trip where we did buff, boars, and then Bantang at the end. And to be honest, it took him 3 weeks to get to a level of fitness that I wouldn't even say was acceptable from Aiden and I. And we obviously set a pretty high standard for people that have hunted with us. So it probably took Dad 3 weeks just to acclimatise to get to an acceptable level of fitness, but also just the way that we sort of hunt. Everything's like what we've sort of alluded to on the podcast. Everything's very organised, and you've got your pack ready for the next day. So you wake up, you roll out of bed, you quickly eat, you film whatever you need to film, you roll out, you hunt all day, you come back, you eat, you get your stuff ready, you go to sleep, it's, some may say the fun has been stripped out of it, but it's sort of how we do it, and I guess sort of the level that we sort of perform at it now, especially because like we've said, we're trying to do all the filming stuff as well, which in general just complicates and compounds any sort of time constraints that you have. But yeah, this time Dad, he was actually really good. He sort of, obviously when you're gassing it up a big hill, he'd stop and catch his breath, which, as you can expect, like most people when we hunt, anyone pretty much else that we hunt with normally has to do that. But he was good. He was a lot better. And even just having his gear prepared, to be honest, he normally is sort of a bit all over the place. And oh, have you got this? Can we borrow this? Oh, you don't. Anyway, whereas this trip he pretty much had everything sorted. He'd been shooting his bow. He'd actually got a new bow, which I think was a big step for Dad. And yeah, had been shooting it a lot and enjoying it. So he's shooting. Or it might have been the pilot cuts, but yeah, he was absolutely nailing the critters this trip and gave him plenty of confidence, and they were sort of dropping like flies, which was awesome to see. So he's done really well.
I think I've got to give credit to both Aidan and yourself, because you both sort of continually just stated that, look, you need to get to a gym, you got to get onto a Stairmaster, is that what it is? Yeah. And Aidan said, start on level 6 and get to 70 flights of stairs. So I've now, on James's advice, I got a backpack with the 10 kilo weight on it. I take that every second day, because I think every day, I'm doing it 6 days a week. I have 1 day off, and I'm doing a minimum of 70 flights of stairs, so daily. But I've also spoken to one of the gym instructors there, and it's funny, like this younger generation, there's no excuses, because we had an hour session where he just wanted to have a chat to me and see what I wanted to get, the outcome I wanted from my membership. And I remember talking to him, and I said, I just want to let you know that I'm 60. And straight away, first thing he goes, mate, you sound like a victim. He goes, we don't do that here. And I go, oh my God, that's Aidan. Right.
I loved it. I thought it was the best thing. I like this bloke already. I've never met him. Don't know his name. Because to be honest, it probably makes me sound like a tyrant, but I say that to a fair few people, to be honest, when they give me excuses. And yeah, anyway, so I loved that bloke said it to Dad when he was trying to take the easy road and get the cop out that he's 60 years old. And I guess for those people that are listening, hopefully you can draw on a bit of Dad's inspiration, that, it's never too late to change, or you're never too old to change, and you're never too, time poor to find that extra half an hour that it takes to stop off at a gym on the way home and do the Stairmaster. And especially, if it's just leading up to the rut, there's plenty of gyms now that you get full programs and even meal plans if you want it, as well as PT and stuff like that. Like, it's never been easier to get fit with the knowledge and information that's shared out there, and how easy it can be. So really the only thing stopping you from doing it is the excuses that you can create, or, the victim mentality that you've got, as Dad's sometimes had for the last, 20 years. But we're breaking him out. We're getting him out. And like I said, it was a lot more impressive this trip than last trip. So it's going to be exciting to see how much he's changed actually. And, because I don't imagine Dad and I might do a boar trip up here for some winter boars in June or something like that. But otherwise, the next time we probably go on a hunt will be up in Coburg again for some bantang with Pato and Aidan and Dad. So it'll be exciting to see the transition from now at sort of the end of April until then.
Well, I've got I think a 6 or 7 month gym membership, so I want to continue that on. And, like I said, I want to get there 6 days a week. And I think once it becomes behavioural, and you just, like you said, just you got to do it, it just sinks in. And I hate getting there, but when I finish, I enjoy it. Have a shower, have a meal, go to bed, repeat.
Yep. Yeah, that's it. Once you break the cycle and the habit, and you get to the gym, you never regret doing a session. You know what I mean? Like, it's always, you walk out of there and you're like, that was awesome.
But to be fair, like, I haven't hunted like you guys are hunting. Like, you will view an animal on a bench and then you're running down, and that takes a lot of fitness, a lot of mental toughness. I guess I appreciate what Nick Morton does as well, on his boars, and I guess the hills are probably a lot more severe. Having said that, this property that you're on, it's not a huge property, but the surface area, like from, the mountain range, they're quite, can you imagine having a certain square area, but you're having all these peaks and troughs? So there's so many area to cover, and there's so many valleys, and you got to get down. There's so much thick cover. So sometimes it's raining in the morning, and then it's 3 hours later the sun's out and you're cooking. So you got all these variables that you got to deal with, and I guess it's all mental. So I mean, I've taken a lot away from this trip, which I'll sort of go home and I think I'm moving in the right positive direction to make me a better hunter and a better person to continue doing what we do, as a family, because I love this family time. And it's not always about, the trophies, and I just love what we do.
Being so passionate about food and cooking, we have teamed up with Camp Chef. With portable cookware for wherever your travels take you, Camp Chef provides a better way to cook food. Whether in the backyard or the backcountry, shop pellet grills, their cast iron range, or portable cooking systems today. We personally love their large 12-inch diameter skillets and camp ovens for cooking over the coals.
Alrighty, legends. Well, that wraps up this week's podcast. As always, thank you so much for chiming in. And we're going to tackle a couple of FAQs now that have been sent in from our listeners. If you guys want to feature on the podcast and get your questions answered, please send them through with the subject line FAQ to info@twinelements.com.au. Or equally, you can find us at Twin Elements on Instagram, or Aidan Doumtsis Outdoors on Instagram, or James Doumtsis Outdoors on Instagram. And you can just send us a message there, ask your question, and we'll answer you there, but then we'll also answer it on the podcast, because as usual, if someone asks it in, there's normally 10 other people that want the same question answered, and we get a lot of feedback from these. So we'll continue to do them because you guys love us answering your questions. So this week's question was sent in actually off our Facebook account for Twin Elements from Gussie Ray, and that is, what's your take on overseas fallow having such great headgear in comparison to Australia as a whole? Is it a genetic or a feed issue? So great question, mate, and thanks for sending that one in. So I actually went to Bulgaria back in 2019, so getting on a couple of years ago now. But as a whole, I definitely think that the main sort of, not issue here because it's just what we've got, but the main reason why you see a lot better heads overseas is due to the genetics of the deer, but also the management of how people manage them here. So as you can tell from my story previously, like if you're shooting $40 on a place a year, and they're not able to get old and reach their genetic peak, then obviously that's going to be one huge factor. And then the next thing that we talk about with is an animal's genetic potential, and also then the nutritional requirements for them to be able to meet that genetic potential. So often with, deer in Australia, the fact that they can sort of go essentially wherever they want, like there's obviously exclusion fences and that type of thing. But for the most part, like other than having really bad seasons, a fallow buck is going to go and find the best feed it possibly can, and have pretty good tucker, because generally they're finding paddocks or, crops that have been locked up, or paddocks that have been locked up for cattle or sheep, with pretty low pressure, and they're going to grow out and put on plenty of feed after the rut. So nutritionally, if it is a hard year, they can have some problems. But the biggest thing that I've found, and this is especially drawing on friends that are sort of what I would call deer fanatics that actually love deer so much in a hunting perspective, where they've got their own deer in pens and stuff just because they like looking at them and stuff. And as you can imagine, like, having deer in a pens, like the nutrition in that pen isn't going to be the best. Like it's not like they're then a domestic animal with like confined spaces and stuff to herd size and also stocking rates and that sort of thing. But the genetic potential of these animals is ridiculous. So they're like Hungarian bloodlines and Bulgarian bloodlines, similar to the ones I hunted overseas. And these animals are literally going from spikers to 200 Douglas score in their first head, or near to. Whereas for some and a lot of animals and herds here in Australia, shooting a 200 Douglas point fallow deer, I mean, it could be an age thing with management in terms of a high hunting pressure, but it could also be just a genetic thing where they're not that big. And so these pen animals, it's nothing for them to be 5 years old, sort of in 280 inch score wise bucks. So to answer that question, I definitely think within Australia the most limiting factor is the genetics rather than the nutrition. I think, like I said, like management and hunting pressure is probably the next actual biggest factor rather than nutrition, because They do have free reign and they can sort of go wherever they want. It's probably more that fact that, at 4 years old, a buck looks fairly handy. And, a lot of people will opt to take that animal. There's very few places where they sort of manage for having those older bucks. Whereas overseas, they've got that age class and structure already organised. And so they're shooting their bucks at 6, 7, 8 years old because they've got the age structure and they're not having to wait years. Where if you imagine like here in Australia, if the oldest buck that you have on your place is 4 years old, well, if you shoot that, well, the next year, just say it's also a 4-year-old. Whereas if you want 7-year-old bucks on your place, you've got to wait 3 years. And that's under the assumption that no one else is also hunting the place and not going to shoot it, or it doesn't get shot on a crop and whatnot. So actually finding truly old critters, whether it be, boars or red deer or anything really, is quite hard to do. And so, I definitely think genetic potential is probably the biggest limiting factor for us having huge fallow deer here in Australia, but also then those management rules and also people just shooting a lot of deer, which makes it quite hard to find the big ones. But that's why when you do, it's quite special. And our last listener question has been sent in by good mate Tommy Sierra. So this one was sent in just asking about all the camera gear, more probably helping other people out. Just asking, hey guys, what type of camera gear, including lens and camera bodies, do you guys use when filming your hunts? I'd love to get a breakdown of why you use a certain gear, but also your recommendations on what camera you would get someone who's trying to get in and start filming their hunts to use. So thanks for that, Tommy. And so the two lenses, Aiden and I are Sony guys, just because it's obviously easier for us to have the same type of body, I guess. So there's obviously Nikon, Canon, Sony. I'm sure there's plenty of other ones that have all different sort of mounts on them. So it's sort of like power drills. Like once you choose a certain brand, you generally stick with that because then it's got the same batteries and the same chargers and the same accessories and blah, blah, blah. So it's sort of like that with cameras. So Aiden and I are Sony guys. So Aiden has the Sony A7 IV and I've got, which is sort of a hybrid. So that's for taking photos because Aiden's a lot better at taking photos than me and a lot more passionate about it, to be honest, too. But also really good at filming at 40 because it's got 42 megapixels. So if you want to blow up, photos and whatnot, like what we have for our prints, it's a lot of it's going to be done on the A7 IV. Whereas I bought the S3, which is mainly a filming camera, and that's mainly because the color, it's got what we call 10-bit color, which just has super high sort of detail, I guess, and like the colors that you can get with color grading and like that is just phenomenal, and it's arguably one of the best sort of filming cameras for its price. So that's the sort of two cameras bodies that we use. The lenses that we use, we've sort of gone to 3 different lens types. So we used to have a 150 to 600 mil lens, which was a Sigma that we used to use, and that was like an absolute powerhouse. We've used these. We actually just bought a second one, which we broke earlier in the rut, which was a bit unlucky. So we're going to send that and get that fixed up. But that was an absolute powerhouse. And the other one was like a classic, just 24 to 70 mil lens, which once again is just like probably the 2 lenses that I recommend. The newest lens that we've got is the Sony 70 to 200, and that's probably mainly more for just that sort of middle of the range when you're doing the final stalk. Like you need something. The 150 to 600 we run on a tripod. The 24 to 70 we run on a gimbal normally or freehand, and it was just a bit hard with the final stages of the stalk where you were doing it freehand, so you couldn't have the big lens, but you want to film like the hunter, the subject moving in on the stalk, but also film that over the shoulder, like, detail where there's an animal just say 100 meters away. That 70 mil just wasn't quite enough. And so that's why we've gone to the 70 to 200, where you can film both some B-roll of the hunter moving in, but also punch in on the subject on whatever you're hunting, just in that final section where you sort of put the tripod away. And so, we've got some sick content with that. Obviously Miss Dad's shot on the spiker, but the rest of them, we've got some awesome footage there. that we can't wait to share that with you guys. And just to answer the second part of the question, so I think I've touched on this before, but the camera that I would recommend for people getting into filming their own hunts or just have an interest in sort of outdoor photography, or, you know, when you're out there just taking some photos of some bucks or some, you know, some birds or anything like that, or lizards, would be the Sony RX10 Mark IV. So we Aiden and I ran that camera for, I want to say more than 5 years. We end up both having one just because it's such a powerhouse of a camera. Like, it's a one-stop shop, do it all. We sort of moved away from it just purely because of the main thing really was like the quality is awesome, but it still just doesn't compare to an SLR. But if you're not looking at doing that like super high-end sort of photography or work or whatever, like the quality of the video and the photos that you get from it, and the fact that it's like, you know, I think I was saying it's like 1.3 kilos. It's got a 24mm lens up to like a 600mm lens, all built into one. You know, so you can film stuff from, you know, a couple hundred meters away across the ridge, but also film stuff, you know, 10 meters away easily. The only thing that let it down was the battery quality on it is super poor compared to the other Sony cameras. So like our Sonys, you know, like even filming with two cameras, I might churn, like if it's a big day of filming, I might churn through 3 batteries on each camera. On a big day of filming with the RX10, it'd be nothing to churn through 8. So we had like a huge amount of batteries and we're constantly charging stuff, heaps of charges, which was probably the only limitation. But if you're just looking at, you know, filming your mates' hunts, you know, maybe doing some four-wheel driving, doing a bit of camping, you know, you can take some real cool photos with it just for, you know, your kids' bar mitzvah, I don't know, whatever you want to do. It's just going to be a great family camera. It's not going to break the budget. It's one-stop shop, do-it-all camera. And even though we've obviously moved away from it, if someone's looking for a camera, I still can't beat it on all the specs for the price of it. So that's what I'd be jumping into if I was getting into it. But thanks for sending those questions in, fellas. We really appreciate it. And if you've got a question that you want answered on the podcast or just answered by Aiden and I, make sure to send them through, whether that be on Facebook, through the emails, or Instagram. So thank you again. Alrighty, legends. Well, that is the end of this podcast, and sadly our rut series here on the Twin Elements podcast. It's been a wild month of filming and also podcasting, trying to make sure these episodes are getting out to you guys. And as always, we've had some fantastic feedback. It seems like you guys have really enjoyed having all these stories come through and us sort of share the highs and lows of our hunts, but also just lessons that we've learnt while being out in the field. So once again, thank you all for supporting the podcast. There's plenty happening over here at Twin Elements with videos rolling out. So in the not too distant future, we've got our Northern Territory series, which will be coming out on the YouTube channel. We've also got the Against All Odd film, which I'm editing at the moment, which will come out as a vlog series. So we've broken that down into multiple different parts just to sort of expand on sort of the hunt, I guess, because there was nearly whole days or morning hunts or afternoon hunts that got missed. If it wasn't super high action, we just, like in that first cinematic feature film, we just wanted to keep it really sort of fast paced for you guys, but we've decided to break it down into more detail. So there's going to be plenty happening on the YouTube channel. We'll also get started straight away on editing these all these rut vids. So I think there's, from last count, there's about 7 vids worth of content that we filmed for this rut. So we'll get them chopped up and ready for the YouTube channel as well. As always, thank you for everyone who's subscribed, reviewed, and rated the podcast. We've got a bit of a mixed selection of podcast topics coming out in the future, but we always want to know from you guys if there's specific topics that you guys want covered, whether that be, you know, some more tips and tactics on certain species of animals, you know, whether it be more of a deep dive into what I do, you know, hunting a property for the first time, whether it be getting access, whether it be, you know, New Zealand hunts and what gear we use over there, whether it be US hunts, how to apply for tags and systems. We do have the team at Hunt and Fool lined up, so we're going to have a couple of podcasts with them talking about, you know, applying for elk, applying for whitetail, applying for mule deer, applying for antelope, and sheep and stuff like that in the not too distant future. and sort of break down what that looks like for you guys who are interested in hunting the US and Canada and Alaska and that type of thing. So yeah, if you've got a topic that you want, you can either send that in to us at Twin Elements on Instagram, or you can send that to James Doumtsis Outdoors or Aiden Doumtsis Outdoors on Instagram. Equally, we've got Facebook, or send it through to our email at info@twinelements.com.au with the subject outline for saying that you would like this as a podcast topic. Once again, guys, thank you for all the support, and this is definitely quickly becoming one of our favorite platforms for getting our information and content out to you guys. So thank you for all the love. Thank you to all the legends that share on their stories on Instagram. Thank you for all the awesome messages and feedback that we get from you guys weekly about people really enjoying the podcast and taking away a lot from it. Like, it's interesting how many new people were jumping on board, and messaging us about, like the Red Deer and Rut podcast that we've did. Obviously, it's already, it's a month ago now. And, we've got people jumping on being like, oh, I wish I'd listened to this before the Rut. I wish, especially with the meat and processing stuff, with people shooting, little pigs and stuff, and then not having the confidence to go and eat them and stuff. So if you've got friends that you think would benefit from the podcast, make sure to share it with them, because no matter how experienced people are as hunters, I'm sure they'll be able to take some little tip or tactic away from all the content that Aiden and I are sharing through here. And we can't wait to keep putting the content out for you guys. So as always, thank you for listening to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, and we'll talk to you legends soon.